Hello everyone, and thanks for joining me here on the hulls. And last weekend we spent all weekend finishing spraying the bow and the stern, the hull extensions, and that meant that we can take the protective coating off the windows. We were able to open her eyes for the very first time, and the ambient light inside now has just increased immensely. So I'm very happy not to be working in a cave anymore. I've got 6 weeks to go before I launch at this stage, so I'm really stoked to get to this stage, but there's a lot to do. Janet last weekend started formulating a project management spreadsheet, and when she handed it to me, I have to admit I died a little. I thought, wow, the amount of work that is to come in the next 6 weeks to get this thing on the water is monumental, and there's so much more to come. So this week's video, we're going to get into the rudders. I'm going to get right into making those, and you're going to see how I'm putting them together, our carbon rudders. And I'm making a spare, obviously, for some redundancy and obviously for some long-term safety. Let's get into it. It can be a bit of a problem when you decide to make one modification and then you have to standardize it all over the boat. I've used my textured roller to such effect around the hatches. I've decided I'm going to do the edge of the hardtop with that textured roller as well. I was always wondering how I was going to finish it, and it's one of those areas that's going to need either a bit of trim or something nice to complete it. So what I've decided to do is the edge of this combing here, with this guttering system here, I'm actually going to put a texture on that as well, all the way up here and then all the way around the actual hardtop itself. I'll do with the texturing. I'm going to do this side first, then I'll work on the other side, and then I'll do the back, because the back actually needs some bit more work. I've got a stern light to go on the back there, so I've got a little bit of work to do there before I can do that part, but I'll get this part done now. And that will tidy that right up, and basically a raw edge here. It's just going to need that texturing to be put on, and it's going to look pretty fantastic. So I'm pretty happy with that decision. I do have to do some work over here on the helm now that this is all polished up. Around the line box, I've decided the opening of that will have that texture on it as well as the combing, and this high wear area here where the ropes are going to, or the lines are going to be feeding across to the rope box. I want to make sure that there's not a lot of chafing, a lot of wear on that gel coat there. So plenty to do, and then I'll come over and do this side, maybe even do it today. So we'll see how we go. Janet back on the job. She's on a mission. How you going? Did you get that done down there? Yeah. Cool. Janet's down flow coating out our robes down here, so it's all production line stuff this week. Loving it. It's all about productivity. We've had a heap of visitors this week, and every time I get started there's something else comes up, so we're trying to get as much done as possible. Janet's working away on some flow coating. I'm about to flow coat, texture the edge of this hard top here, and I've decided my little pads for our helm station are going to get done as well. So I've masked them up, and I'll have a little texture which will actually almost match the wrap, a little bit more aggressive, so it'll make them stand out, which will be nice. So yeah, that's all ready to go. I'm going to get my textured roller out and we'll get this done, and then it's going to be good. Alright, go for it, honey. How's that new flow coat? You know, it's a different colour, a different white, so I can't use that on the outside of the boat. It has to be the Newplex white rather than the New Chem white, but the New Chem white can go inside. It's actually polar white, which is a totally different white. We've got a bright white on the boat and polar white on the actual on the inside of all of our robes, and I used to use polar white to make the kayaks because it's a slight off-white, which is nice for a kayak hull because they tend to get a little very grubby with the river scum and stuff. The stripe coating out the first with the brush. Yeah, good idea. Starting to get some finishing touches done. It's really lovely. Don't be shy with that stripe coating either. No. So Janet's been going hard down in the port forward cabin, flow coating out the robes, and that is nice because that means these rooms are almost finished. Pretty excited about that, hey? What are you doing in here? Flow coating. This one's going to be a bit of a challenge because there's a wire conduit run in there, but at least we can get them flow coated out, and then we can come in and do some finishing on the surfaces there, and I can actually tidy up that conduit that's there. Yeah, this one here's been done a couple of hours ago, so it's still a bit tacky, so we're going to give that a couple of days to cure, then I'll give it a light sand and a polish, and then it'll be done. Been a bit of fun, hasn't it?
Yeah, no, it's something different.
It's hard to see what you're doing there, but yeah, it's grey flow coated in these ones, and I'm grey in these smaller cupboards, and then white obviously in our main robe. Alright, hard top chip repair, and I've started sanding down the actual hard top to get it all polished up, so pretty happy with that. In the cabins we have the stern robes being flow coated here. Oh, you are doing an awesome job, honey. Brilliant. That is such a good feeling, isn't it, to get that done? Now I've asked Janet to leave this section just here because just to sort of flow coat around the black carbon there, because I may have to put another couple of layers in for our chain plates. Janet's got it all happening in here. Well done, darling. And I have completed the textured surround all the way around the hard top here, all the way along, and I've given this a absolutely huge clean. This whole top here was absolutely putrid about a day ago. I've now sanded the edge here, so it's all ready for wet and dry. I'm going to have to basically get my 1200 grit up here with my DA sander and just wet sand the whole top before I can give it 3 polishes. But that's going to be really nice to get this particular one done up, and then I can start moving my way forward. There is a cleaning regime going on here at the moment because I'm sick of the dirt, but also I need to start protecting the finish. You can see here how dirty this is along the margin between the hard top and the deck itself, and the anti-slip. I bought a heap of hydrochloric acid and anti-slip cleaner this week, hundreds of dollars worth, hopefully to give the entire thing a good clean before I give it a buff as well. It'd be nice to get that back to white as well. That should be the same colour as the surrounding area, and it certainly isn't. Lex is going alright, isn't she, mate? Hey? So I'm nearly 14, everyone. Hey? Oh, good old girl. I love being on the helm. So I've actually got the helm seat frame up in the factory being polished, but I've had to put in these inserts here just to make it all level up, and what I've done is I've actually done the textured surround around it as well. Same deal here. I glued another one onto that to make sure it fits perfectly, because I don't want to be changing the shape of the hard top now. And I've also polished up the entire back of the boat, so it's all looking beautiful and clean with this new textured surround all the way around. It's not only me working here today, Janet's back down in here doing a second coat. Just sanded out the entire wardrobe now. Yeah, looking good. Those wardrobes, they're looking absolutely fantastic now with all the white flow coat. So it's a bit of a process. Whoa, she stinks in there. Wow. About 6 months ago, we began the fabrication of our rudders, and what we actually did was Janet laid down a 6mm sheet, flat sheet of carbon unidirectionals, and that's a 600 gram carbon unidirectional with some layers of 600 double bias in between. So we now have 6mm thick carbon plates with which to make our rudders from. Now this is a unique rudder design. I've actually worked off the plan that I have back there. I think it was given to Darren, a mate of mine, by another fellow down in Victoria called Rusty. And Rusty's, I think you're probably following along, but I was actually able to get a copy of it, and I really appreciate it, Rusty. I mean, I'll give you a carton of beer for it, to be honest. it sort of got me out of having to make a mold for a rudder system. And typically a rudder system would be made in a two-piece mold, and then the shaft of the rudder would be laid in there with welded tines if it was stainless, or some sort of a tine in it to tie it to the rudder itself. This is a bit of a different design in that the center spine forms the basis of the rudder, so it needs to be flat and extremely rigid, so very, very rigid. The other thing is then the shaft is engaged into the spine, so it'll actually be engaged into the center part here, and then 3 leaves will form the shape. It'll then be populated with foam and shaped back to those leaves to make the form of the rudder, and then there'll be a laminate over the top, and then on the trailing edge it'll be double wrapped on the ends as well, and on the leading edge we'll have it double wrapped as well. So all up, you've got a complete epoxy rudder that is basically a carbon shaft, and I'm going to make 3. So you remember that we actually laid up enough to make 3 to form a spare. Now, why make a spare, I hear you ask, and that is really a paramount question. I have enough storage space within my sugar scoop to keep a spare rudder, and I thought while I'm laying it up and I'm all set up, it's easier to make 3. Probably intentionally should have made 4. However, 3 should get us out of trouble. It's very unlikely we're going to hit something as wide as a catamaran unless it's a whale sideways, and damage both rudders. But at least I've got 1 spare, and technically you should still be able to steer a catamaran reasonably well to safety with 1 rudder. So I've made up these 3 sheets. They're based off the plans that I have in front of me here, and we've done it with the laminate recommended here, but we've substituted a lot of that for carbon, and we've doubled up the carbon to make sure that it actually is going to be more than substantial enough for a rudder system. Now, the carbon we've used is a 600 gram unidirectional, and that means that everything runs vertically. So these are actually laid in a vertical plane, and that gives the rudder very good strength on a lengthways basis. The only thing with carbon is if it caps a crack or gets hit by something, it can cause a catastrophic failure. So there's going to be a lot of glass involved here to tie the whole thing together. We're trying to keep weight out of it, but weight's not really my concern too much. It's more about having that rigidity to enact the amount of forces that are going to be placed on this rudder. So by acting carbon here and then tying in the foam with the carbon leaves, and with this unidirectional, we should have a more than strong enough rudder. Our friend Darren Smith's actually got a 40-foot shotting catamaran, and he has rudders made in exactly the same way, and he can effectively sit the boat on the rudders and on his hull without any risk of damage. You can sit it on the sand, and we've actually done that when we had to replace a propeller on his boat. So I think this system is going to be very interesting. I've decided I'm going to finally get into it because it's one of those things. It's going to take a couple of weeks to actually make these rudders, and I can do it amongst a whole lot of other jobs that I'm doing. So I've got 3 carbon shafts. These are 1.4 meters long, and they're 6mm thick carbon. They've been made by Kilwell Composites in Rudder in New Zealand, and these guys make a lot of carbon spars for racing yachts, and a lot of the, I guess the F50 boats actually would have a lot of Kilwell composite parts in it, because New Zealand's pretty big into the lightweight, super high performance sailing, and these guys really knew what he was talking about. He's got unidirectionals running both ways, and he's laminated this on a mandrel or spindle machine, and that has given these shafts extreme structural integrity. So let's get into it. So you can see here the rudder is quite long. In fact, I'll be cutting about this much off because my rudder gland and bearing is only around about here. So I'll end up with probably about 30% wastage, but I'll keep that for another project. I've got some other plans for these other pieces. But it's beautiful carbon shaft, made on a machine, not hand laid. This is all infused and mandrel made, so top quality stuff. What I basically have to do is determine the top point where I need to sand that down so that I can bond the blade to the shaft. Then I have to bond the leaves to the blade and the shaft by laminating that together. Then I have to fill it with foam, then we have to shape the foam, then we have to laminate over the top, and then put extra protection on the fore and aft end of the rudder to make sure that we end up with a really super strong rudder. But the advantage of this is that this spine, if it ever gets hit, will actually cop quite a substantial load, as opposed to something that's foam filled without a spine will actually collapse, and then potential water ingress, and then you've got a whole range of other problems with, you know, rotting and leakage and weight and all those other things that go along with it. And once that starts to delaminate within the actual rudder itself, you've got a whole world of other problems. That means that basically it's not going to be able to handle the tension and the stresses that a rudder having to turn with all that water force and a 42-foot catamaran hanging off it. I'm very convinced that this is the best way to go. I have seen some other ones. I think Mads on Sail Life made a rudder mold, and the way he did his mold was quite fantastic. He infused it, he basically filled it with an epoxy expanding foam. This is just another method or another way to go, and if I've got three, I've got a spare. First thing I need to do, I've got them all set up, is to glue the shaft to the blade. That is very important. I've just gone and trimmed them to fit them perfectly, and you'll notice here I've actually sat them on an exactly 21mm spacer underneath, so that means none of it can collapse, and essentially it's going to be, which is exactly halfway through the diameter of the shaft. So what I'll do is I'll run a bead of epoxy all the way around the join and join the physical edge of the rudder blade to the shaft itself. I've prepared the shafts, I've sanded them up, and they're etched adequately. I'm going to give it a wipe with acetone, as they are made with epoxy, and I'm using epoxy to complete this job. And then tomorrow I'll come and install the leaves on this side, and then I can flip it over and do the other side, and then basically I can get on to populating it with the foam, and then, you know, basically the end of the week these should be almost done. They'll be at least complete and shaped, and then I can start to laminate them up. So it's important. I'm going to put a fillet in all the way around here, and then I'll laminate it in tomorrow, and then I'll put the leaves on as well, so the laminating will get done almost within the chemistry of the epoxy, and then the leaves will go on, and they'll be then laminated to the shaft and to the actual blade itself. So I'm getting multiple points of contact to the shaft, and all done within the chemistry of the epoxy to ensure that I get all these leaves in place. And then the whole thing is going to be full of foam and full of epoxy, so it won't be subject to osmosis or absorption. This is going to be a 3 or 4 day affair, just getting the tines and the leaves put in, but that is now finished. I'm going to do a bit of cleanup on this side. They're beautiful and light, and I don't intend them to be probably too much heavier, probably 1 kilo heavier than this, and you know, that at the moment would only be 2 kilos, so that's a nice result. And super strong, super rigid. But all 3 of those now glued up, and they're pretty clean. These ones are pretty clean. I did clean them before I went home last night. So I'm going to glue these leads on with epoxy, but on each end I'm going to put a little dab of hot glue just to hold them in exactly the right position, because they're a little bit floppy, until this all sets up, and then I can come in tomorrow or later on today in fact and laminate them. I do not want this moving while I'm working on them, so these have to be in exactly the right position to obtain the correct foil shape. By tabbing it in with a little dollop of hot glue on the end, I can ensure that I get the exact right position. Come back and once again, working within the chemistry of the epoxy, I can ensure that I get a good laminate over the whole lot. I've got to tab these in place. There's quite a lot of work involved in making these, and this is only side one, so I have to do the other side as well.